From the headquarters of the Guild of Champions, this is the Becoming Thin podcast, and I am your host, Chris Terrell. And welcome to another week of your weight loss quest. How did this last week go for you, champion? What new challenges did you encounter? But more importantly, what failure did you go through, and what lesson did you get from that failure? Come on now. Don't let a perfectly good failure go by without you getting your lesson. That's your reward for your troubles, after all. Now, if you're new here, I've lost 125 pounds myself after an entire adulthood of chronic yo-yo dieting. Up, down, up again. Before I finally got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I made some permanent, meaningful, and actual changes to my real-life lifestyle, habits, routines, environment, community, and to my systems of belief. Because it's all 6 of those things that created the results of my life. And if I wanted to get new results, I was going to have to go change those same 6 things. And now I'm here each week to help you get the results in your life of losing weight and keeping it off forever. It's been an absolute joy and privilege to be doing this. And I have been really enjoying the new podcast format of taking questions, doing some breaks in there. Allows me to cover more topics in the course of an hour. I've been hearing your feedback. Many of you are liking some of the insights. Now, I'm full disclosure, I am seeking to find the balance of information density and time. I'm usually, with my style of talking and conveying information, I tend to jam a lot of information in. And so I listened back to last week's podcast. I was like, yep, there's a lot of information in that episode. So, but it seemed like many of you got a lot of value out of it. I'm going to try to find a little bit more of the balance this week of information density. But I want to give you a lot because I have a lot to share. And continuing with our emotional eating series, all the questions that come in this episode came from the Becoming Thin Facebook group, which you can become a member of by going to becomingthin.com, locating resources, or you can search for Becoming Thin on Facebook. Would love to have you be a part of the group. Ask questions in there, maybe get it answered here on the show. And I had so many questions about emotional eating that I've made the decision to break this into several episodes. So we're episode 2 and what will probably be a 4-part series around emotional eating. But I wanted to talk about an element, phase of emotional eating. It's the turn when you begin to start approaching it differently. You see, there's this quiet moment on a weight loss journey that sneaks up on a lot of us. It doesn't sneak up with fanfare. It doesn't sneak up with signs. No. Just a soft, uneasy awareness. Something is shifting. You don't hate food, right? I mean, you still love the food. You're not suddenly fixed. You're just tired. You're tired of starting over, tired of feeling powerless, tired of chasing comfort that seems to be now costing more than it's giving you. And this is where emotional eating really begins to unravel. Not because food stopped tasting good. It still tastes good. And it's not because the food's not offering relief. It didn't suddenly stop giving you emotional relief. It still does. No, it's starting to unravel because you're finally beginning to see what all this emotional eating is costing you. Emotional eating worked. And that's what makes it so hard to let go, isn't it? The emotional eating, it softened edges, it distracted you. When you had a hard moment, it could redirect your feelings. It let you hit pause when life was asking way too much. And it wasn't just the food, it was also the lack of movement, right? The eating more, moving less. And if you're anything like me, you leaned on the emotional eating, not because you're weak, no, but because no one ever taught you how to sit in discomfort without it. You never learned. But here's the hard truth. For many of us, we used food so consistently for so long that we never learned how to face the things food helped us avoid. We never learned to face our anxieties and how to manage it. We never learned to face our own loneliness from our own mind and how to feel not alone. We never learned how to fix relationship tension with ourselves or with others. We never learned how to ask better self-worth questions or how to work through our self-worth issues, the clutter in our life, the debt in our bank balances, the silence We left all those problems untouched, right? We stored them in the metaphorical attic. Hoped these problems, these stressors would just vanish on their own and everything would work itself out. But of course, they didn't, did they? And now, just to add some insult to injury, the food isn't working quite like it used to. It doesn't soothe quite the way it once did. This awareness that you're creating, it's starting to make the food almost hurt as well as helping. Maybe even hurting more than it's helping. And the problems, well, the problems are still there, though. Sometimes the problems are worse. Maybe they're more complex now than they used to be, right? You know, the problems in life at 40 years old seem to be far more complex at times than they did at 22. But so now you're here and you're on this journey. You're wanting to work on your emotional eating impulses and you're caught. You can't stay here. You know, you can't keep doing this emotional eating stuff to manage all your problems because you're starting to outgrow this, you realize. But you can't move forward the way you used to. You know, your favorite coping tool can't come with you. This is the really, really hard part of this journey. This is why weight loss is hard. Not because mechanics are hard. No, those are easy. This is what's hard. You've got to start moving towards the very things that always sent you running to food, and you've got to do it without the food. All the things that stressed you out and made you feel like you needed the food. You have to go to those things, feel the need for the food, and not turn to it. It's like standing at the edge of a forest that you've avoided going into for years, and it's dark. You don't know what's in this metaphorical forest, but you know it's time to go in. And you're going in without your flashlight that used to keep you comforted and keep you from feeling fear. You're heading off into the unknown, towards your problems without your favorite coping tool. This right here is where a lot of people quit. Not because they don't care, but because they don't feel prepared. I mean, you're going to need new tools. You're going to need real tools to get through this. Like, you're not just going to just do this suddenly. This is a project. You're going to need other people in your life. You're going to need something I call OSPs. It's an acronym. It stands for Only Supportive People. These are the ones who help you stay grounded when your emotions start kind of, clouding your judgment a little bit. You need to upgrade the way you think. You're going to have to shift from thinking things like, why do I keep doing this, to instead things like, what am I supposed to be learning here? What am I missing? You're going to have to go from like, how do I stop messing up, to like, how do I get better at getting back up after I mess up? And most of all, you're going to have to, you're going to need to change the relationship you have with yourself in many cases. For many of you, if you're anything like me, I had to work on my relationship with myself. I had to become someone I could rely on. I had to become someone who doesn't abandon myself the moment pain shows up. I had to become someone who doesn't run from discomfort, but rather I listen to what my discomfort is trying to tell me. Look, I know this sounds hard, and it's because it is hard. You're not just giving up some little habit. You're giving up something that's like giving up a friend almost. Like, you're letting go of a coping mechanism that brought real relief in real time. And you've been doing it for a long time, reliably. But that time has passed. It's like a child outgrowing a toy. Not because they've stopped loving it. It's because life is calling the child to grow towards something more. And you've got to be let go of. Growth has its own gravity. Eventually, you stop being able to pretend that instant gratification, instant distractions, and avoidance are working. At a certain point, you're just going to stop pretending that that's working. And eventually, you're going to hear the pull of something deeper. And what's going to happen when that happens is emotional eating is, you're going to start to realize that it's in your way. And it's going to start to feel like an anchor that you just can't carry anymore. That's what I'm trying to help you feel. I'm trying to help you feel the weight of this emotional anchor that you're carrying. You'll begin to realize you haven't failed. You're not broken. All that's happening is you're waking up. waking up, though, is disorienting. Have you ever had that happen? You wake up from a nap so deep, you forgot where you were and you got to get your bearings. That's what this is like. It's this waking up. You're stripping away all the comforts you thought you needed, that you've been telling yourself you needed for a long time, like food and activities. And this is coming because you're introducing clarity. But clarity comes with something. It comes with choice. Not an easy choice, but a real choice. It's the choice to face the life you've been avoiding. The clarity provides you the choice to feel things fully. Clarity provides the choice to stop negotiating with something that's been silently running your life. Like old Linda at the office, talking smack all the time. And rather than dealing with it, you go home and seek your comfort with food. You're going to have to choose to stop negotiating with Linda and go talk. Now, today we're going to talk about all of this. We're going to unpack the difference between a treat and a trap. We're going to uncover the difference between choosing food and using food. We're going to look at what happens when moderation becomes a disguise for denial, and we're going to talk about grief, because giving up emotional eating isn't just behavior change. It's identity shift, and letting go of a pattern like that, it's going to be painful. We're going to talk about the moment you realize I've taken this too far for too long, and how to begin the process of becoming someone new. We're going to talk about hope. We're going to talk about how to feel lost and still move forward. Lots of great things coming. I can't wait to get into this episode with you. All right, we'll be right back in just a moment. Take our first listener question. Welcome back to the Becoming Thin podcast. All of our questions today come to us from the Becoming Thin community over on Facebook. You can learn more about that community by heading on over to becomingthin.com or by searching for Becoming Thin on Facebook, and you can come join our free group over there. So our first question today comes to us from Alexandria. Let's see. We'll pick up right here. It's a powerful question. I mean, this hits on a few layers, so we're going to have to split this into a couple of parts. But she asks, how do I know when it's good for me to have a treat versus whether I'm emotionally eating? Are there ways to curb the emotional eating without distracting myself? Stopping emotional eating seems exhausting. It's mentally and emotionally drains me to fight those urges. How do I do this in baby steps? Okay. So we're going to break this down into three parts. What we're going to do. Three parts. Let's see. First, what's the difference between having a treat and emotionally eating? This is where a lot of people get tripped up. Because when you don't have clarity on what is what, it's actually hard to feel like you're in control. So we want to define these terms. A treat is a food. Emotional eating is a behavior. When you're having a treat, it usually means that you're choosing to eat something more indulgent. You're like maybe a cookie or chips or something like that. A dessert, as it could be. Probably higher in calories, probably lower in nutritional density, but it's still food, and it probably still has value. I mean, look, even an Oreo has ingredients your body knows what to do with, okay? It's not completely devoid of nutrition. It's just not a lot of variety of nutrition, right? You need variety of nutrition. But emotional eating, that's not about food. That's the difference. Emotional eating, it's about why you're eating. It's not hunger. It's not planned. It's usually, emotional eating is usually reactive, and it's often compulsive in nature. It often will even feel like you don't have a choice. Like you will literally in your head be like, I don't want to do this, but I feel like I have to. In the book, The 8 Keys to End Emotional Eating by Dr. Howard Farkas, my favorite book on emotional eating, he describes emotionally eating as a problematic pattern, something you do to soothe or suppress emotions rather than working through or feeling the emotions, right? You're not reaching for the cookie to enjoy the cookie, even though you might think that. No, you're reaching for the cookie maybe because something hurts and your brain wants relief when? Right now. So if you're wondering to yourself right now, like, well, wait, am I emotionally eating or am I just having a treat? Here's a question. You could ask yourself this to help flesh it out. Am I choosing this or is something choosing it for me? Right? If you're choosing this, if you're fully in control, maybe it's okay. But if something else is choosing it for you, no. Let's talk about the second part of this. Can you stop emotional eating without distraction? Honestly, no. No, you cannot. Trying to fight an emotional eating urge head on without distraction, especially at first, it's like trying to wrestle with a tidal wave. You are not going to win by just simply bracing yourself and hoping it passes by. It's just too much. That's what makes this so exhausting. You're in the ocean fighting the waves, So when somebody says like, I'm emotionally drained just trying to resist these urges, as you said, I get it. And here's why. You're trying to use willpower to combat your emotions, but the emotions are going to almost always win. Willpower takes a ton of energy and it's finite. And if the emotions is tied to a long-standing coping pattern that your brain has practiced for years, your brain isn't having to put a lot of effort into this to get you to want to do it. So you're using willpower, which takes a ton of energy, to combat something that takes virtually no energy. So instead of telling your brain not to do something, which is what many of us do, don't eat the food, don't do this, don't do that. Or instead of doing that, give it something else to do. That way you're not saying don't eat the cookie. You're instead saying, let's go do XYZ thing instead. This is where the new coping strategies come in. We're not trying to punish yourself, right? This isn't going to work by punishing yourself. And we're not trying to outsmart the emotion. What we're trying to do is understand the emotion so that we can interrupt the pattern. When I was going through my emotional eating recovery work myself, I started a habit I called sunset chasing. So I love photography. And what I would do is in the evenings, often after work, I would grab my camera and I'd go chase sunsets and watch them. Why? Because in the evenings is usually when my cravings would hit me. And, look, sometimes I didn't. Actually, a lot of times I didn't get good photos. But getting good photos wasn't the point. That was the bonus. The point was to not be on the couch where the food was, sitting in my feelings and my emotions, having a pity party. I did not need to be there. I needed to be doing things. I needed to be occupied. I mean, even now, I'm in a calorie deficit right now after a bulking phase. Look, and yes, emotional eating doesn't rule my life the way it used to, not at all. But I still feel the urges. They haven't vanished. I just don't sit long enough for them to take over. The moment I notice them, I act. I do something about it, and I notice them far sooner. Let's talk about the third part of your question, though. How do you take baby steps towards changing this? I'm glad you're asking that, because actually, this is the part most people miss. Most people try to go from 0 to perfect, to go from completely unaware to all the problematic behaviors and activities that they're doing to no, now I'm just perfect and I'll never emotionally eat again. People want to just do that overnight. That's not how this works. So I love that you're asking the question of how do I take baby steps towards changing this, because that's actually realistic, and you might actually this might actually work. You might actually get it done. So your first step is not to stop emotional eating. Let me repeat that because that's a little confusing. Your first step is not to stop emotional eating. No, your first step is actually to notice emotional eating as it's happening. What a lot of us do is we start with retroactive awareness, I call it. You realize what happened after the fact. You've already eaten the snacks. You're staring at the wrappers. Okay, that's fine. Now, that's where most of us start. We start with retroactive awareness, but that's just your starting point. Your first objective, your first baby step is to arrive at present awareness. Your job's to learn, not shame yourself. Your job's to observe what happened in the moment, why it happened. So what you have to do is you have to wherever you find your awareness, usually again, it'll be after when you're looking at the empty wrappers, but you just start asking yourself, what was I feeling right before I went and got this food that's now gone? What was going on in my mind right before I did this? Maybe look around. Was there a repetitive time of day that this keeps happening? How's your energy level? Ask yourself, was I feeling tired right before I went and did this? Was I feeling bored? Was I feeling lonely? You have to be like a detective on the hunt, trying to reverse engineer the facts and see where the evidence takes you. You see, what happens is, as you do this, as you begin to try to unpack what was occurring, you will begin to eventually be present and you will have awareness in real time. So you'll catch yourself mid-bite and go whoa, I'm about to emotionally eat this, right? Is that what I'm about to do? I'm about to do it. Oh my gosh, I was doing it. That's what you got to get to. Now, you might still finish the food, right? You might not stop. You might be like, oh, wow, I'm doing that. Then you just get back into it. And you're winning. This is what it looks like. Now, if you're 2 years later, still that's where you are. You've stopped progressing. This is baby step one, is to get to the place of awareness as it's happening. But once you do that, you continue to work backwards in time. And eventually you get to a point where you feel the urge rising up to emotionally eat and you haven't even taken any action on it. You're like, I know this feeling. Whenever I feel this, I always end up in the pantry. Okay. Now you have space between the feeling and the pantry. In that space, you can choose a different path. Rather than the path to the pantry, you can take a path to the, kitchen table where your wife is and sit down and talk with her about your feelings. That's where the power is. So baby step one is not stop eating emotionally. Just become present when it's happening. From there, once you build your awareness, you can begin to work to replacing the habits and conditioning new thinking. But you don't remove it cold turkey. We'll talk about how to find a few of those replacement patterns later or behaviors later in this episode. But a final thought with this. As you mentioned, treats. Treats aren't bad. Honestly, emotional eating isn't categorically bad. It's just automatic. And what you're talking about here is bringing consciousness to the unconscious activities. And yes, it's very tiring at first. It is. You're rewiring your mind. And you're trying to go against the automatic. But with each rep, it gets easier. The noise will get slightly quieter. The emotional eating episodes will get slowly less frequent. So just don't focus on never emotionally eating again. Just focus right now on knowing when you are, as soon as you can. Get really, really good at detecting it. That's your first win. And then you can build from that to the next one and to the next one, and the next one. Great question. Thank you so much for asking that one. This is the Becoming Thin podcast, and we'll be right back with our next question. Welcome back to the Becoming Thin podcast, where we're taking listener questions this week, all about emotional eating. And in fact, we're going to be doing it for the next several weeks. The next question has a lot in it, so I'm not going to waste any time with anything. We're just going to dive right in because I got a little bit to read to you. This question comes from Leanne, again from the Becoming Thin Facebook group. Leanne asks, one evening this week, I found myself surrounded by 3 empty ice cream wrappers after a 45-minute tantrum that my son had. I recognized that it was an emotional coping mechanism for me, as I felt that I was not a good enough mother. I have always been a Last Supper binge eater. That person who eats all the bad things today so that tomorrow I can be good. One of the practices that has been advised in the book you recommended, The 8 Keys to End Emotional Eating, is to have those bad foods around so I don't feel like I will never be able to eat them again. Mostly that has been a positive step, and I have noticed that I don't feel the pull to those foods anymore. But this has taken months. But you mentioned to create friction. To me, that means don't have those foods around. So I would like to know, is there more benefit on not having those foods around, or is it better to have the smaller versions of those foods around? Also, is there a difference between binge eating and emotional eating? I often see those two terms being interchanged, and for me, I would think there's a difference. I think there are times that I emotionally eat, for example, to celebrate a birthday, where we'll be perhaps overeating, but not a binge. All right. I want to take this one piece by piece. There's so much depth in what was shared here. So I'll reread small sections. We'll break it down. So she wrote, one evening this week, I found myself surrounded by 3 empty ice cream wrappers after a 45-minute tantrum my son had. I recognized that it was a coping mechanism for me, as I felt I was not a good enough mother. Well, I mean, this is a good place to start. Because what we're really talking about here isn't just emotional eating in response to a tantrum. It's emotional eating in response to the story you were telling yourself about the tantrum. It wasn't just the tantrum. That emotional hit that you took that led to the food didn't come from the yelling or the mess or the noise. Yes, those are a part of it, but that's not what it came from. What it came from was the meaning your brain was assigning to it. I'm not a good enough mother. Now listen. Of course, yes, a tantrum is stressful for a child. Of course, it can push you to the emotional edge. Of course. But in that moment, if you're not careful, an additional narrative in your own mind will kick in. I'm failing. Other moms would handle this better. That's where the spiral begins, right? You know, the comparison game to the imaginary perfect mom out there that you've never met. This is why I think in these situations, using the word "and" is particularly powerful and helpful. Yes, that tantrum was hard, and you were doing your best. Yes, you felt unsure what to do, and you kept going. Yes, parenting is overwhelming, and that doesn't make you bad. Using "and" allows us to hold multiple truths within us at once, even if they conflict. It lets us interrupt the shame before it spirals into behavior that we regret, like diving into food to soothe the shame. So when you feel like a bad mom, emotional eating becomes your relief, doesn't it? The comfort. It's that little permission slip. Oh, mom's eating to escape. Leave me alone. Mom's eating. But that story isn't even true. And challenging that internal dialogue is one of the most powerful skills that you could build on with this journey. Let's continue on here. Break this down further here in your question. You said, I've always been a Last Supper binge eater. The person who eats all the bad things today so that tomorrow I can be good. This is really common. I'm starting to call it the start over loop. You overeat now, tell yourself you'll be perfect tomorrow, and then you're not. Get down on yourself, and then repeat. Right? Overeat, tell yourself you'll be perfect, get down on your, or then not keep it together, overeat, repeat. Here's what I want you to hear loud and clear right now. I want you to hear loud and clear. There are no good foods, and there are no bad foods. There are no good foods, and there are no bad foods. There's just food. The belief that some foods are quote unquote bad and that some foods are quote unquote good is one of the core lies of the diet culture out there that many of us adopt. And it has to be rejected at the very beginning of a sustainable transformation such as this. Healthy food can help make you healthier because that's what it does. But healthy eating alone won't make you lose weight. You could eat really healthy, but if you eat too much, you still won't lose weight. And likewise, though, a treat doesn't make you unhealthy or bad either. It's just a food choice. We have to look at all the foods you eat, not one or two. So when you say you binge all the bad foods, what's really happening is your mind is responding to some sort of perceived restriction, and it's pushing back against it, whether it's real or perceived. You know, then you go on to bring up, let's see here. Yeah. Yeah, you're bringing up something I think a lot of people deal with. In the 8 Keys to End Emotional Eating book that I've been referencing a lot, it says to keep those bad foods around so that you'll never be able to eat them again. That's helped me feel less pull towards them, but it's taken months. Well, it's taken months because it usually does. Sometimes this takes years to do, and that's okay. I was saying it earlier in the episode, the goal isn't to suddenly be cured of emotional eating. The goal is to gradually reduce the emotional charge those foods have over you. Your goal is to gradually have these foods become more neutral, to be able to be around them and not have that obsessed feeling. But you brought up a real clear tension here. You talk about creating friction, and isn't that the opposite of keeping those foods around? Good question. Let me clear this one up. They're not opposites. They're different. You see, exposure helps you reduce fear. And friction helps you reduce impulses. So sometimes, yes, it is helpful to keep a food in the house so that you can stop seeing it as a forbidden fruit. But sometimes the pull of that particular food is just too strong for it to be in your home. Now so maybe the friction is too low and the old habit is just too wired in deep. And you can add friction by like not buying something or storing it in a hard to reach place or only keeping a single serving. This can help break you of the automatic loop. But sometimes a food needs to take a little break from your house for a minute. Sometimes it doesn't. You have to look. Like, I don't think you should tell yourself, no, I can never have this food. You just might say, no, this food doesn't live in my home. But that's not the objective for it to be that way. We want to get to the place that you could be around any food and you don't lose your shit. I don't want you to keep the great foods that you love out of your life forever. I want you to train your brain to be more neutral towards them. Because right now you're not. But and you don't have to do that with all your trigger foods at once, though, which is nice. If there's 5 or 10 foods that really trigger you, just start with one of them. Get all of them out of your house and then just have one of them in your home and use friction and use and expose yourself to it intentionally under controlled circumstances. And just practice being more aware with your feelings with that food. And another part of your question, you said, is there a difference between binge eating and emotional eating? People use the terms interchangeably, but I feel like they're different. And you're absolutely right. They are different. Emotional eating is any eating done for reasons other than hunger. That includes things like boredom eating, stress eating, celebration eating, reward eating, all of it. Binge eating is typically more intense. It's eating large quantities of food, often very quickly, and with a sense of being out of control. So binge eating is a form of emotional eating, but it's a very extreme form of it. Not all emotional eating is binging. And not even all binges are even emotional. Some of them are literally compulsive patterns. But binge eating, as I said, is emotional eating, and it's on the extreme end of the emotional eating spectrum. And it usually comes with a lot more distress and a lot more guilt afterwards. So I'm glad you asked us, because that is a worthwhile thing to understand. They're not the same thing. They are, but they're not. Anyway. And then finally, last part, sometimes I emotionally eat for celebrations like a birthday. That doesn't feel like a binge to me. That's because it isn't. That's not a binge. That's actually emotional eating paired with awareness. All right, you're celebrating, you're enjoying, you're present, you're there. That's not the same thing as stuffing down pain or escaping some discomfort. So it's important that we make space for joy around food. Emotional eating isn't the enemy. Unconsciously emotional eating is, and using it to soothe our troubled heart. Now, that said, if you're trying to lose weight, you still may have to say no to the cake sometimes, even when it's a joyful moment, because you have to be in a deficit somehow. You can't have everything and still be in a deficit. And that's the tension of doing the two projects at once, working on your emotional eating and working on your weight loss. And for some of you, doing both feels like too much. So let me give you permission. If you're finding that it is too hard to work on your emotional eating and to lose weight, work on your emotional eating first. Put weight loss on pause and focus on healing your relationship with food first. Don't do weight loss first. Because once you build emotional stability, once you build more emotional resilience, once you level up some of your coping skills, weight loss is going to be so much easier. You might even lose a little weight while you're doing that work. But if you force weight loss while you're working on the beginning parts of the emotional eating patterns and they're still dominating you, you're only just adding pressure to yourself, and the pressure just breaks people. So, Leanne, it sounds like you're doing the deep, meaningful work here. So keep challenging the old stories, keep using the tools, and remember, you're not failing if it takes time. You're just becoming one moment at a time, one moment at a time. Thanks for the question. This is the Becoming Thin podcast. Hey, if you're ready to stop starting over and you know deep down that what you've been doing with food just isn't working out anymore, I want to invite you to check out the Guild of Champions. It's my membership community for people who are done with fad diets and want real lasting change. Inside the Guild, you'll get coaching, accountability, and support from people who get it. People who are walking the same path as you. And this is not just about losing weight. It's actually about helping you build a life that you don't have to escape from anymore. So come join us. You don't have to do this alone. You can learn more about this at theguildofchampions.com. Welcome back to the Becoming Thin podcast. Let's jump right in with our next question. Well, this next question isn't really a question. It's more of an opinion. And it's an important one to talk about. It comes from Farah. Farah says, I feel like emotional eating gets a bad rap. I think it's human nature to eat emotionally. The problem lies in doing so on autopilot. Being aware that you are sad and are using food as a tool to make you feel better is not always bad. Because then you can be mindful of how much you eat, or maybe opt for a healthier alternative. Once done, you get up, shake yourself off, and move on with life. Now, actually, I totally agree with parts of this that she wrote here. I agree. It is human nature to eat emotionally. Food has always been a part of emotional expression in every culture that I'm aware of for humans. Celebration, comfort, connection, even grief. It's a normal part of being a human. I agree. And she's right here that the real damage often happens when emotional eating is done on autopilot, as she called it. When it becomes unconscious and reactive. Yeah, that's where people lose control. That's where people spiral into way too much eating and then regret, guilt, and shame. But while I do agree with those parts, let's look at this next part. Being aware that you're sad and are using food as a tool to make you feel better is not always bad. This is a part I want to unpack because while that actually sounds on the surface like a balanced approach, and I think it's said with good intention, I actually believe this kind of thinking can backfire, especially for people who have a history of emotional eating. And here's why. When emotional eating has become a pattern in someone's life, a go-to coping mechanism, they've trained their brain to pair discomfort with food relief. It's no longer a choice anymore. It's a conditioned behavioral response. It's a pattern. You feel bad, then you eat, you feel temporary relief, and then the loop repeats. And every time it repeats, the loop gets stronger. The mind makes the neurons chunkier. The brain doesn't evaluate whether it's a good idea to do it again or not. It just knows this works. I feel bad, if I want relief, this works to give me relief. And the more it works, the more automatic it becomes, the more faith the mind has that it will work. And then the faster the reaction, and the harder it is to interrupt because it becomes more automatic and faster. This is important to understand. Once that link is built in the brain, it doesn't go away just because we became aware of the link. Trust me, I've tried. Awareness is necessary. It is the necessary and essential first step to working through all this, but it is not sufficient. It is not enough. It's not even close. Knowing that you're using food to soothe emotions doesn't stop the loop. In fact, for many people, it just reinforces it because it now gives them permission to keep doing it. As long as I'm doing it consciously, I'm aware I'm doing it as I keep repeating the loop again and again and again. But if you're reaching for food in moments of emotional pain, especially if this is something you've done many times before, you're not actually making new choices. You're just repeating the familiar ones under a new label. You made it look nicer. So let's talk about the idea of control. I can be just as mindful of how much I eat or choose something healthier. All right. That might sound reasonable too. But here's where we see over and over and over again in people who struggle with emotional eating something. This is what we see. Trying to control emotional eating is like trying to moderate a reflex. When you are in a heightened emotional state, especially if you're stressed or overwhelmed, lonely, or ashamed, the logical part of your brain, your decision-making center, actually begins to shut down. That part of you goes more offline, sometimes totally offline, and the emotional mind begins to take over. And that part of the brain doesn't care about portion sizes. It doesn't care that you chose the healthy snack. It only knows food will make this pain go away right now. So yes, maybe you chose to eat something smaller. Maybe you stop before it turns into a binge, but you've still reinforced the same associative loop. Bad feeling leads to eating food, leads to feeling better, which leads to repeating the cycle. Over time, that loop doesn't matter if you say, "Oh, but I'm aware." It just gets stronger. The brain becomes more efficient at choosing that option, not less, the more you do it. Eventually, this idea, this illusion of control becomes a full-fledged mirage. Full-fledged mirage. Now, the next thing you said, you get up, shake yourself off, and move on with life. Get up, shake yourself off, and move on with life. Again, on the surface, this sounds healthy. Resilient, even. Like someone who doesn't let a moment of emotional eating ruin their whole day. But here's my question. What are you moving on from? Are you moving on from the emotional eating as well as moving on from the discomfort that preceded it, the emotion you were running from and the sources of stress? Are you also moving on from that? Because if the answer is yes, I'm moving on from all of those. I'm moving on from the emotional eating. I'm moving on from the thing that made me want to emotionally eat. I'm moving on from the stress, and I'm just continuing on with my life. If nothing was processed, confronted, or resolved, then all that happened was the feeling got quiet for a while and the pain got muffled. But the source is still there, intact, untouched, and now stronger than before. The problem is still just as active. You didn't solve anything. You just delayed it. And this is the actual risk of emotional eating. It creates temporary relief without any resolution. It allows a person to numb out and not go deal with anything. You still have the problem. The reason for emotionally eating is intact. Just because you said you're aware, that's just step one, is the awareness. No, just because you're aware doesn't make it okay. It just means you're aware. You just added another behavior on top of it. Let me give you an example. Let's say your coworker, Linda, treats you disrespectfully. You come home, you're upset, and instead of confronting Linda, setting a boundary, or processing your emotions fully, you eat something to, why? Feel better. I've had a hard day. and you get some temporary relief, right? Maybe even real pleasure. And then what did you say? Move on. But the next day, that same coworker's still there. And you're still not okay with what happened. And the only coping tool that you've ever practiced up until this point is food. And this is what keeps people stuck, not just with their weight, but in loops of unprocessed stress. Because emotional eating doesn't heal. It doesn't solve. It just punts. It delays. It avoids. It distracts. Now, I'm not saying you can never enjoy food when you're sad. I'm not saying that food can't bring comfort. No, that's not the point. The point is this. If you, as an individual, have a history of emotional eating and you're trying to break the cycle, you can't keep using the same strategy that built the pattern and expect different results. At some point, the line must be drawn. And the line is this. Food is no longer your coping tool. Not for sadness, not for stress, not for disappointment. Yes, you get to enjoy food, but you don't get to medicate with it anymore. And not because you're being punished. This isn't a punishment. You're just learning to process emotions without needing to silence them, without needing to shoo them off. That's real growth. That's healing. And yes, it's uncomfortable at first when you do this. But you're retraining your brain. Like, this is just how it works. You're giving it the space to build new associations. You're choosing presence over pacification. So while I do respect the intention behind the perspective you shared, and I see the heart in it, if emotional eating, though, is something that's held you or anybody back in the past, then I don't believe you can afford to keep it in your toolbox. There are better tools. There are stronger tools, more versatile tools. There are tools that lead you forward instead of looping you back. There are tools that don't create an entirely new problem just by using them. So everybody listening, and let this be a moment where you draw the line. Let food become food again. And you become someone that doesn't need to run from their feelings anymore. You're capable of that, I promise. And if the loop stops, and if the loop stops working, because you finally managed to interrupt it, maybe you can start the healing. When you stop running from the emotions and you start letting the emotions be expressed and realized. Great question. I'm glad you asked this. I'm glad we got to talk about this. This is Becoming Thin Podcast, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back. If you have not yet done so, I would like to invite you to give the podcast a rating and a review. If you found the podcast to be a valuable resource on your weight loss journey, please consider sharing an impactful episode on your social media. I want to help as many people as possible achieve the weight loss they desire, and you sharing, rating, and reviewing podcast episodes helps get it in front of more people. Hey, and if you're on Spotify, you can leave a comment. So consider leaving a message down below in the app. I read all the comments and I love reading them. Let's move on to our last one. This one comes from Lori. Lori shared something that I think speaks to a very deep part of the journey. She says, I currently feel almost cheated that food as a coping mechanism is delicious and soothing. The idea of finding new ways to cope feels somewhat scary and depressing all at the same time. I want to sit with that for a moment. Because that's not a question. That's a reckoning. There's something deeply human about what you're feeling here and expressing in your words. To realize that the very thing that comforted you, that soothed you, that maybe even saved you at times, is now something you need to let go of. Not because it stopped working, but because the cost of using it finally became too high. That does feel unfair. That does feel like being cheated. It's the moment when a sort of innocence slips away. Not because something was taken, but because you're finally beginning to see it clearly. Part of the illusion with emotional eating is that it feels like it's helping at first. It gives comfort. It provides pause. It gives space to mentally breathe. But what's often hidden beneath that comfort is a quiet avoidance. I mean, it's not intentional. It's not malicious. It's just unconscious. We don't choose emotional eating because we're weak. We choose it because at some point in the past, it worked. In the past, it got us through a hard moment. And then we used it again. And it worked again. Then we used it again. And it worked again. And we kept doing it. Until one day, it wasn't just something we did when no one was watching. It was something we, without even realizing it, we began to rely on it, to depend on it. It became a crutch. Here's the part that's, I think that's difficult to admit. For some, for me, it can be. Food wasn't the enemy. It was the friend I leaned on when no one else knew what I needed. And for me, letting go of that wasn't just a behavioral shift. It was an emotional loss. It led to grief. And there was a voice in my head that would say things like, but I liked it. It made me feel better. Why do I have to give this up? Other people get to do these things and I don't. I'd see all these people still indulging and gorging themselves in the food. Why don't I get to do that? I get the voice. It's the voice that mourns not just the behavior, but what it represented. You know, the food represented escape. It represented familiarity. Hell, even when it was a diet and such, it worked because it represented rebellion when I wanted to rebel against something else. But here's where something can start to shift if you'll let it. There comes a moment where you'll stop seeing emotional eating as a comfort. And this is hard. You'll start to begin to see it as a cage. Granted, it's a soft one, a familiar one even, but a cage nonetheless. This cage, it numbs the pain, but it also mutes your power. It calms the chaos, but crushes your clarity. It soothes your soul, but it also prevents you from ever confronting the things that were troubling your soul in the first place. And yes, the idea of finding new coping tools can feel really annoying and dumb at first. And of course it does. You don't have any trust built with them. Food worked immediately, and you have a long history of it. So your brain has a lot of faith that it will work. It's part of the appeal. These other tools that you're hearing about, they don't work as good at first. They're slower. They're subtler. You don't get that same dopamine spike from going on a walk at first. You don't get that numbing relief that you were hoping for unconsciously from journaling. You don't get a sugar high from breathing through your emotions while you take a hot bath. It's just not the same, because it's not the same. So at first, it feels like a downgrade, doesn't it? This feels like a loss, like giving up something real for something that feels flimsy and fake, like going from meat to tofu. But this is where you got to slow down and look deeper. I don't want you replacing your coping mechanisms. I want you to be evolving them forward. There's a bit of a beautiful irony here. The very discomfort you're feeling about giving up emotional eating is actually evidence that you're moving forward on the healing process. You're waking up. You're starting to feel again. And yeah, it hurts. Doesn't hurt because you're broken. Doesn't hurt because something's wrong. It hurts because your body is trying to process things. Your heart's trying to work through things it hasn't had a chance to or had to do in years. This is not failure. This is growth. This is the messy, unglamorous, deeply courageous, real shit. You just sit in the feeling and feel the frustration. So no, you're not being asked to give something up and get nothing in return. You're being invited to do something better. Instead of eating to suppress anxiety, you'll learn to sit with it long enough to act on what's causing it. Instead of reaching for food when you feel unworthy, you'll learn to recognize that pain earlier, and you'll learn to offer that pain compassion instead of offering that pain a cookie. Instead of numbing the side of you that hurts, you'll start listening. You'll find slowly that you actually can handle your emotions. You just didn't know that because you never did before. Because food is always stepping in to do the job for you, preventing you from ever needing to. It was your champion fighting your fights for you. I want to share something I had to come to terms with on my own journey. There was a part of me that believed emotional eating was the thing keeping me from functioning. There's a part of me that believed that emotional eating was the thing that was keeping me functioning. Like, I looked at the food as the thing helping me hold it together. Like, it's the reason why I was doing everything. It was an essential part of my success. But the truth, it was what was keeping me stuck. I had, in fact, been successful in spite of my emotional eating. Because when I numbed out with food, I wasn't solving the things that were hurting me. I was just pressing pause and delaying it so the hurt could continue tomorrow. And then I would just hope the problems would go away on its own. Spoiler alert, most of them didn't. But when I finally let myself start sitting in my own discomfort, when I finally stopped interrupting the pain before it could speak, and I let it speak and heard what it had to say, I realized something. My problems don't require emotional eating. My problems require my attention. And attention is something food will never give you. The food isn't paying attention to you. So yes, Lori, you're in the middle of something hard and real and emotional. And it's okay to feel a little bitter. It's okay to feel a little cheated, a little scared. But don't confuse those feelings with the truth, okay? You're not losing comfort. You're reclaiming freedom. And freedom doesn't come with a sugar high. It comes with self-trust. And the good news is you're building this self-trust right now. Just by being aware. Just by feeling this ache in your heart, this bitterness. Just by asking these questions. Sit with it. Sit with these feelings. Because what's on the other side of all this isn't just a better way to cope, it's a better way to live. So I'm glad you brought this up, Lori, so that we could talk about this natural, very normal part of the journey. We feel a little bitter at what we got to let go of. Thanks for asking. We'll be back in a moment on the Becoming Thin podcast. Welcome back. Thanks so much for listening to the Becoming Thin podcast. Thanks for so much for being a listener. And more importantly, thanks for working on you. I see you, I hear you showing up every week for you. I know that last week you made sacrifices and did things in the name of your dream, of your goal. And you did it for you because you deserve it. You're worth showing up for. You're worth sacrificing for. This week, someone or something is going to tempt you to go back to the old ways. You're going to look at that fork in the road, and you're going to choose the road less traveled by, because you know what it's going to bring you. You're going to choose the road less traveled by and say no when you normally would be saying yes. You're going to say yes when you would normally be saying no. Because that future you is waiting, and you know it. Time's going to pass. Time's your ally. Nothing we can do about it. We got to let it pass. So you might as well enjoy yourself all along the way, but you also might as well get excited as you're rushing through time to meet the next version of you. And just know that the next version of you is going to be so grateful for all the sacrifices you're going to make this week. And I promise, it's worth it. When you're on the other side and you're reflecting back on you, you'll be grateful. And you'll still be alive then. And you'll feel that gratitude. And it's going to make you feel better. And that's what emotional healing looks like. When you sacrifice today for your future self, rather than today criticizing your past self. Because you deserve it. And your future self is counting on you. Take a small step today. Do it again tomorrow. And do it again tomorrow. And do it again tomorrow. And I'll see you next week on the Becoming Thin podcast.